been involved with the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine since its inauguration in 1989, when at that time I was a foundation board member of the faculty.
We discovered that cells had receptors that we could block or we could antagonise, and that just all the beta blockers, all the angiotensin inhibitors, all the lipid lowering treatments, we suddenly discovered that we could manipulate the body's systems much better. And all of that started in the late 60s, early 70s. So the 80s was just incredible. Everybody was working on really interesting treatments.
The faculty was actually the next step forward, really. I mean, the whole thing had been developed since the 1950s and 60s and 70s, and it was in the 80s that then it became, if you like, mature enough.
The actual proposal to have a faculty was in 1986 at the AMAPI, the Association of Medical Advisors in the Pharmaceutical Industry, annual meeting, which actually took place in the Royal College of Physicians. We were discussing whether medical advisors was really the right terminology for people who are an integral part of the pharmaceutical industry and taking very significant decisions. We started talking about whether we should be called pharmaceutical physicians as opposed to medical advisors, and I stood up and suggested that possibly we should form the same sort of professional underpinning that other physicians have. So at the end of the annual general meeting of AMAPI, there was a couple of camps. One was to discuss how we change the name to BRAP, the British Association of Pharmaceutical Physicians, and the other was perhaps we could actually set up a faculty. And Peter and I and a couple of others went to have breakfast with Bill Hoffenberg, Sir Raymond Hoffenberg, who was the then president of the Royal College of Physicians.
Hoffenberg and the others, I don't know if Flic mentioned this, but Hoffenberg was actually very encouraging and drawing us in, as were the Edinburgh and Glasgow colleges.
He actually sat there, we had our silver service for breakfast, and he thought this was quite a good idea. We explained that there needed to be standards so that people were operating who were trained to do the prescribing that we did for the country, globally, whatever we were doing. And he looked at me and he said, Flic, I think you would be the youngest person and possibly not the right sex to be called a grandfather, because that's what we will do. We will grandfather you all into the faculty at the start of setting up the faculty. So once we persuaded Bill Hoffenberg, it took us another 3 years to get to the point where we had the faculty inaugurated. And during that time, I was the chair of the founding committee. Just 2 months before the actual inauguration ceremony, the president of the Royal College of Physicians switched from Bill Hoffenberg to Margaret Turner Warwick, who I think, as everybody knows, was quite a daunting lady. And I was summoned to her office to try for her to understand why some commercial group of people in medicine should now have their own faculty, and how on earth was she going to actually defend this. So we had a quite difficult meeting, and I tried to explain to her that it actually was a very important discipline. And to give her her due, she went on to support us really incredibly over the next few years of her presidency in order to help us get the PMST underway.